in the Machete Brothers, there's a scene where Dino recalls a incident where he sees his brother's reaction to a German Shepherd being killed, or I think on they're driving or something, and a German Shepherd is killed on the highway. And in that scene, Matty Cole points out that it doesn't really make sense, and then he asks his mother about it, and she said it did indeed happen, but Aldo or Gino must have told you because you weren't even born at that point.
Mm.
And that scene is very interesting, and it's a small little scene that shows the idea of memory and how there's false memory. And if there's one constant in all of your work, it is memory, and how memory is sometimes unreliable, and the idea of truth in memory, and not the PC kind of truth. Truth in the sense that it is something that changes and is as malleable and can be true at only certain times and only in an objective sense. So let's talk about the idea of memory in your work, and you can use that specific scene as a jumping off point, as I said.
I don't remember the particulars of that scene, and a lot of people. I mean, I vaguely recall it now that you mentioned it. Um, uh, you have to understand too. I've written thousands of poems, over 1,000 essays. I've written, I've probably written somewhere on the order of 10 to 12 million words that would form my mature corpus. Not to mention, another couple of million words in juvenile poems and whatnot. So I can't remember every poem or whatnot unless I see it before me. And then even then, there are some poems that I won't forget. But the idea of memory, it just seemed it's something that I guess has always been with me. I've said before, I'm probably the artist or the writer or the poet that deals most with memory, because that everything is going to be a memory. If you see something, and even if I write it down just 20 minutes later when I get home, I'm still dealing with a memory. If a bird twitters off, I'll constantly walk around. My room here is filled with Post-it notes, and I'll always carry, whether I'm at working or not. Uh, I always, whenever I go anywhere, I'm always taking notes. I'll write a note for the way a book should go, or the way a conversation should go, the way this should go. Have to pick up something at the store, and so the memory, it allows for malleability, especially when you're writing too, because as the reader is reading, the reader is under the diegetic fallacy that they are encountering whatever the speaker or the narrator is giving them right then, as if they're in the moment. What happens though is when the narrator then starts going off to say a memory of someone, and if that person in that memory is speaking about someone, it gets that MC Escher like effect. And one of the most important things that I've always dealt with in any writing is the idea of parallax, and that's because I've often said, there's a difference between truth and reality. As we are right now recording this, to say that Peter Cleese and Dan Schneider are Skyping is reality. And it's also the truth if I say Peter Cleese and Dan Schneider are Skyping. That's the truth, but it's always a comment on the reality. 2 hours ago, we weren't Skyping. 2 hours from now, we probably won't be Skyping. But so truth is always a comment on reality. And that's a thing that is often lost within the art. I just did an interview this past weekend where I made that point again. And it never ceases to amaze me how many people in the arts or whatnot conflate these two words, and they are utterly, totally different things. And memory, though, is one of the things that is the great divider. Because when we talk about memory, we have to at least acknowledge that we're remembering things that isn't happening, and it did happen, but how did it happen? People are more willing to admit, for example, that their memory may be flawed when there's a great deal of time that has passed. If you just 20 minutes after you see a bird flutter by, you're not going to be as inclined to admit that your memory could be flawed. But many studies have shown, and you can see these on YouTube clips. A professor is giving a lecture, 50 or 100 people are in the audience there, and someone runs in and steals, runs off with his coat or with his, notebook or something. And then they ask, well, what was stolen? you'll get a dozen different answers. What was the color of the coat the person who ran in was? Different answers. Was it male or female? Different answers. Was it a black, Hispanic, a Chinese person, a white person? Was it a tall person, a short person? Was he fat? Was he thin? These are all things that we clearly see differences of. And I'm going to be doing a show in a few weeks on hopefully on psi phenomena and unexplained phenomena, and why people imbue these things into the realities that their memories distort. But I've just always felt naturally talking about memory, probably because there's a great deal within myself that wants my work to document things. If we're talking about late 20th century U.S. or Western ideas, or just the human condition, people in 1,000 or 10,000 years, whether they're in the Andromeda galaxy, should be able to open up a book and say, well, this is what our ancestors were the most like. And when you do something like total immersion, you get that, and people can say, this was just like my conversation with Uncle Otto when I was raised on the Mars colony 20 years ago. And so people will always have memories, even if we have implants that help us have memory that stores 1,000 times more than what you and I now, as mortal blobs of meat, can store. People will always be going back into them, and they will constantly be rearranging things. And that's an interesting thing, because to get at a truth, if you will, which is an arguable concept, you have to have multiple views of it, so that you can get the three-dimensionality of reality. And only by parallaxing things can you get that three-dimensionality. That's why I will go back in a single work or a single poem even, and talk about the same thing once or twice, so that it's somehow removed or somehow shifted, that you can get the fullness of it. You can't do that when you're just talking very straight up.